Steve,
All
good
right.
evening. How you doing?
Hey,
As we continue our discussion on this fourth day of Kwanzaa and take a serious look at cooperative economics, we'd like to ask a couple of questions of our guest, Mr. Williams, at this time. First of all, Mr. Williams is probably the physical and spiritual and moral leader of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, and maybe he can start off by just giving us a little brief history of the organization and where we are right now. And then he might share with us some of his personal experiences being a person with a lot of roots, particularly family roots in Oklahoma, by sharing with us some of the occurrences in the Tulsa, Oklahoma. And thank you, Mr. Williams, for joining us. Please share with us at this.
my family's Juneteenth from way back, and part of my family, my mom's side, is out of Oklahoma. We're right around outside of Muskogee, close to Shakota, one of the last surviving all black towns known as Renniesville. Renniesville is a pretty historic little place. It's the first cattle stop because of the springs there for the cattle drives coming out of Fort Worth. So there was a lot of barbecuing going on in Bennett right there. It is the home of one of the most significant Civil War battles, where the black troops there defeated the white troops at the Battle of Honey Springs, which was the day before the Battle of Glory, which they decided to make a movie out of, showing those 600 men dying, but not showing the outnumbered black men winning. So that's part of the programming, the subversive indoctrination, I call it in America. John Hope Franklin, great author, is from there. D.C. Menor. My family is, big from that part. And all of them were Juneteenth from way back. I've got involved with Juneteenth as a kid, and everywhere we went, my uncle Jack Pugh brought Juneteenth to Lake Elsinore, California. So I've been ran into a guy in Washington, D.C. I saw a poster on the elevator in the National Press building on my way up to the National Press Club to do some IT support work for them, saying there's going to be a prayer breakfast, a national Juneteenth prayer breakfast the next morning. And this was about 2002. And I had already started with my Mid-Atlantic Juneteenth Foundation because I'm in D.C. and these people are about Emancipation Day. They're not realizing that, just because they're free, the rest of us wasn't free. So, I'm going to come down there and give them so-called wannabe Juneteenth people a piece of my mind because they don't know nothing about Juneteenth. So I go walking in the door and I see this guy sitting in the chair and he said, "Hey, brother." I'm like, "Hey." And it was Doc Myers. And hey, I was disarmed. And the next thing I know, I was a soldier in the cause to make Juneteenth a national holiday. So Doc just found out what I did, and I worked on Capitol Hill, and I had access to all the governors and all the senators directly because my 30-something guys ran the help desk in D.C. for close to 10 years. So Doc used to call me the secret man in D.C. because I could get anything anywhere he needed real quick.
So you would say that Doc Myers was your Juneteenth mentor.
Doc Myers was one of I would say he was a sensei more than anything with legislation. My grandpa was Juneteenth on my dad's side. My uncle helped founded the Juneteenth in Fort Worth. He funded Opal Lee's Juneteenth. If you go anywhere, it's always around me. But as far as being a sensei for making Juneteenth a holiday, the legislative, understanding the legal part of it, I would say the first person to give me the initial understanding would be Daddy Bruce Randolph, who is a Juneteenth legend in Denver, and they have a street named after him. The biggest street in the hood. It's not King Street, it's Daddy Bruce Randolph. And then it would be Doc. You know, Daddy Bruce was a key figure in that. But Doc was the man who made me understand the importance of it being a holiday, not for us, but for America, and to heal America. Because we celebrate everything, but we don't celebrate the end of the Civil War, so it's really still going on. We're not commemorating the end of slavery, so it must really still be going on. So if we really call it to an end, then we need to give a party to the end of it. We celebrate the end of our domination by Britain by the 4th of July, even though we weren't free. By the 4th of July, we just said we was free. We still had a lot of fighting to do. You know, Juneteenth is a realization of our freedom. So, but Doc is my man. I love him. Great musician, great man, a word of God, a spiritual mentor, understood all the different parts. And, you know, we're still hollow. As a foundation, without Doc there's still parts that were missing because of how big of of the shoes that he had. You know, I told Doc, I said, man, I'm not a doctor nor a minister. He said, yeah, you're just an ordinary guy, but you seem to get along with everybody. And so that's what counts. You know, you got the ability. So, but, you know, Doc was a magnificent guy, man. And, yeah, so there's a lot that we have to go through, but he put people together. So, and that's what we have here, this great network of people. So, yeah, and so what we did is in the pursuit is, you know, Doc was doing a lot, and we started talking about legislation and why wasn't the legislation, you know, flying on Capitol Hill. And I told Doc I would sit down and try to figure it out. So a lot of these people, you know, I was, like I said, a good student. Doc would say, go do something, and we all just went and did it. I didn't really question it, didn't look for anything else around, but just did it. So we sat down, and I started talking with these legislative aides, you know, that I had just been seeing in passing. Hey, will you do this for me or take this there? And I sat down and talked with them, and they explained to me that the problem with Juneteenth is, even though it's there, it's really still all about Texas. I said, you know, and I can't get, you know, Senator Wicker or this guy to say, hey, I can get behind this bill when it's all about Texas. You know, what about, you know, what about Illinois? You know, what about Pennsylvania? You know, what about, you know, Virginia? What about these other states, Kentucky? Well, you know, what about them? What is their role in Juneteenth? How can they feel about Juneteenth to make it, you know, for them to embrace it? So that's when we started, you know, shortly after Doc passed, to start to really dig into the history of Juneteenth, unlike anybody else had on an organizational level. And we started pulling in from the great groups of minds of people that Doc had come across and started putting them together virtually. And that's before, you know, the pandemic. We started putting people together virtually and saying, okay, what do you know? What do you know? What do you know? What do you know? Can you all write it out? And we started putting these pieces together about the history of Juneteenth and what was taking place. And then we found out, you know, the great story behind it, and was able to tie in and educate the legislators on their specific roles. You know, Illinois now realized that the black troops that got off the boat that picked up Granger along the way, some black men, they were from Illinois and New York. They were the U.S. colored troops. We just say in the history they were U.S. soldiers, yes, but let's be specific on the agency. They were black men on their way to the border to defend America, you know, and so we learned even more. So we dug into that, and then we realized that the last people that if a nation is the states and the territories. And so we started looking really hard, and we realized that June 19th, 1862, Congress abolished slavery in the territories. That's the first big thing that they did, was the territories. In other words, they ended slavery in the territories before Lincoln wrote or even the Emancipation Proclamation took place. And it took until a year after Granger and the U.S. colored troops, or should I say U.S. colored troops and Granger, arrived in Galveston, forced to land in Galveston. It took a year later, to June 19th, 1866, through the Treaty of 1866, for the last of the slaves to be free in America. And America is its states and its territories. We don't cut off Puerto Rico, although we try to, or Guam, but they're part of our responsibility and they're part of our country. So we expanded that, and so much so that in the last piece of legislation that was written for Juneteenth included Oklahoma in it as the first. And they didn't even know their history, the legislators there. So, the New York didn't know their history and relevance, or that all these black soldiers trained at Fort William Penn in Pennsylvania. So Juneteenth is a unifier, and that's what we had to do with it in order to get it to traction to where it was at today. Talked with Mitch McConnell's aide in Kentucky, and hey, General Granger was with the Kentucky First, and he helped develop the Kentucky First Army. And then he fell in love with a woman from Kentucky, and he went off to fight for the Union Army. Granger did, and then he went back to Kentucky and continued to train, and ended up dying and being buried there in Kentucky. And they didn't know, and I'm like, well, so that's your dog in the fight with Juneteenth. So as Opal Lee says, Juneteenth's a unifier. We had to get that unity for people behind them. We talked about Nevada. Well, Nevada, in the modern story, is the 39th state to ratify legislation for Juneteenth in order to make it happen. There was a moratorium put on adding holidays to the calendar after the Martin Luther King holiday. And so Nevada became the 39th state to ratify that. So that's a little bit of background about Juneteenth education and the movement. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is to take advantage is that from that freeing of them slaves, those enslaved people in Texas and Oklahoma at that time was the seed, the catalyst to start the building of that economic system, which we call Black Wall Street, right? So it was from Juneteenth, from those people taking what they could get, and in Oklahoma, it was fertilized by the United States government, which sent money for reparations to the tribes. The whole situation with Native Americans, enslaving black people, fighting in the Civil War is a long other conversation. It split the tribes, it split the nations, just like it did us. We all had different issues and problems with it. So, but they got fed, they got fertilized, they got supported by the United States government, which sent millions of dollars to the tribes and told the tribes to give this money and land to those people who you had enslaved. Some of the tribes, a lot of the tribes did what they were supposed to. Some of the tribes did not. And there's still stuff trickling back from that today with lawsuits and other things. So, but with that, these people combined their resources together in Oklahoma to trade amongst themselves because at the time, right, it was the Indian territories. It wasn't part of the states. Laws and rules and government was a little bit different. You had a long history of migration in and out of Oklahoma by Native Americans, including the legendary Juan Cabal John Horse, who led the only successful slave revolution. So with that, these small little communities would pop up, and they would trade amongst each other different resources. And most of us, the vast majority was agricultural. Some of it did get into mining and gathering the resources. And some other parts of it did happen to deal with, at the turn of the century, with natural gas and oil. But everybody worked with each other, and because they were working with each other in this train going up and down what is now Highway 40, the black dollar stayed in the community and amongst these communities, the recycling of the black dollar. I can't remember exactly what the terms was, but they said that the average cycle, the average black dollar circulated up to nine times inside the community at that time. So that was a high retention rate, economically speaking, for that community, and it thrived. And it was one of the things that was forcing people, the powers that be, to react. And the amount of black people that were coming and taking advantage of it, and that they wanted to try to turn it into a black state, was one of the reasons why it was brought into the Union and of the United States. And that's the reason why it was, as I was told by Senator Johnson, Law 1, Book 1 was, Jim Crow. But the cooperative economics was very successful there, and the trust was there, and the trust was built there, and people were able to trade goods, resources, and interact with each other with, little to no bias.
Thank you very much for that insightful information, and we want to say thank you to you and to the Juneteenth Observation Foundation of Nevada and the Samuel L. Smith Educational Foundation sponsoring our program today. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Ashe. Ashe.
Okay.